Good evening, and welcome to a virtual presentation of the James Brown African American Room of the Newark Public Library. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Robin R. Beans Coleman, Vice President and Associate Provost of Diversity and Inclusion, Northwestern University. She will bring to us the amazing and complicated history of Blacks in American films, which she writes about in her foundational book, Horo, Noir. My name is Dale Colston, and I'm a librarian at the James Brown African American Room of the Newark Public Library in Newark, New Jersey. On behalf of our director, Jocelyn Bowling Dixon, and Board of Trustees President, Dr. Lauren Wells, we thank you all for joining us this evening. I would like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape First Nations on which we are learning, laboring, and organizing today. We also recognize the devastation and the continued legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, which contributed to present-day systemic racism and oppression. Our space at the library, the James Brown African American Room, was named in honor of the late James Library Brown, a librarian, poet, activist, and influencer who was instrumental in making sure that the library seek and maintain books and resources and present programs examining and celebrating the African American experience. Mr. Brown was especially committed to urging Newark youth to pursue education and to see the value and importance of the library's role in their academic growth. Now, I'd like to introduce my colleague and the producer of this evening's program, Reggie Blanding. Reggie.
Thank you, Dale. Got me sounding all Hollywood producer. Appreciate you. So peace, peoples. Thank you for joining us tonight. Very excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Robin R. Beans Coleman. Just a few words I wrote, and I want to introduce her. So I just want to state, basically from the horrific racism of America's first blockbuster, Birth of a Nation, to the empowering images in the record-breaking Black Panther, the road for Black life to modern day cinema has been one filled with immense complications. I am saying the least right there. In Horo Noir, Dr. Coleman puts the spotlight on the problematic images and narratives combated by Black pioneers in front of and behind the camera. Whether you're a fan of the genre of horror or not, I believe this is a universal story that, amongst other things, bolsters a rich and complex history of Black resistance. So if you like me and appreciate a resistance narrative, this is still a story for you. Let's give out the bona fides here, much deserved bona fides to Dr. Robin R. Beans Coleman. She is a Vice President and Associate Provost for Institutional Diversity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer, and the Ida B. Wells and Ferdinand Barnett Professor of Communication Studies at Northwestern University. An award-winning scholar, Dr. Coleman's work focuses on media studies and the cultural politics of Blackness. Dr. Coleman is the author of Horo Noir, Blacks in American Horror Films from the 1890s to the Present, and African-American Viewers and the Black Situation Comedy, Situating Racial Humor. She is also the author of a number of other academic and popular publications. Dr. Coleman is featured in and co-executive produced the critically acclaimed, award-winning 2019 documentary film, Horo Noir. The film features a who's who cast, including Jordan Peele, Tananarive Due, Ashley Blackwell, William Crane, Rusty Cundiff, Rachel True, Newark, New Jersey's own Ernest Dickerson, Keith David, Mark Harris, and a host of other horror stars and experts. And I can attest to it, it is great, an essential viewing. So please welcome us here and joining us and welcoming Dr. Coleman. So thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, Dale. I think what I love most about these moments is that you instantly make great friends and great colleagues. And so, Dale and Reggie, you're stuck with me because I have a feeling we're going to have a lot to talk about, not only tonight, but going forward. If anybody, the other folks on Facebook Live didn't hear our wonderful conversation, but it's like we've known each other forever. So thank you for having me. So for those who are tuning in, if we can still use that language, I promise you that there will be no scary, bloody clips. So hang in there with me. I am going to share a screen. Let's see if we can get this going. And Reggie, can I get a thumbs up if you can see that properly? Perfect. So I do have a bit of a presentation for you. It's definitely written for the ear. I will read it. And it's funny and it's factual and it's provocative. It's called Black Horror, Enduring Women and Reclaiming the Urban. And before I get started, I must acknowledge or offer our land acknowledgement. In the spirit of healing, I acknowledge and honor the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Ojibwe tribes, the original people of the land upon which Northwestern University, where I'm reading from, stands. So if we're ready, I'll get started. To call up the dead. Go to a cemetery on a Friday night at midnight, one where shootings have taken place. Go to a man's grave taking along with you, 1, a white candle, 2, 1 leaf of wild acacia, and 3, a fully loaded gun. On arrival, you will make this appeal. I require you dead to come to me. After saying these words, you'll hear a stormy noise. You do not take fright. Fire 1 shot. The dead will appear to you. You must not run away, but walk backward 3 steps, saying these words 3 times. I besprinkle you with incense and myrrh, such as perfumed Astaroth's tomb. This so-called real-life, raising the dead Haitian spell comes from William Seabrook's widely read, often cited, 1929 travelogue, The Magic Island. The Magic Island sits right alongside D.W. Griffith's 1915 pro-Ku Klux Klan film, The Birth of a Nation, in its bigoted narrative and imagistic sadism. Both introduced horrifyingly racist falsities turned pernicious stereotypes of Black people that, more than a century later, we have yet to be able to shed. Griffith's Birth of a Nation is the better known. After all, our 28th president and segregationist, Woodrow Wilson, made it the first film to be screened in the White House and to the entire Supreme Court. Through his support, the film became tacit social American policy. Now, if we apply Isabel Pinedo's definition of horror from her book, Recreational Terror, then The Birth of a Nation becomes what Black people have known all along. It's a horror film. Through race-based violence, it disrupts our everyday world. It transgresses and violates boundaries. It works to evoke fear by upsetting the validity of our own rationality. This film solidified in the world's imagination that Black folks are deficient, deviant monsters who, between guzzling bottles of brown liquor out of paper bags and devouring fried chicken on the floor of Congress, prey upon whites. Blackness became corrupted under Griffith and his co-conspirator Thomas Dixon Jr., who wrote The Klansmen, a historical romance of the Ku Klux Klan. The Klansmen is the fictitious source material for the birth of a nation. Griffith had Dixon as his creativity wellspring. William Seabrook had our U.S. Marines, the Marines who occupied and terrorized Haiti between 1915 and 1934. The Marines boasted of their extreme violence and bitter racism that they inflicted upon Haitians. Seabrook took their stories, used their repulsive fictive stories to advance the notion of a monstrous blackness that was deserving of annihilation. Seabrook offered these tales of horrifying so-called voodoo rituals to seal the deal. He wrote, leaping, screaming, writhing black bodies, blood-maddened, sex-maddened, God-maddened, drunken, whirled and danced their dark saturnalia, heads thrown weirdly back, as if their necks were broken, white teeth and eyeballs gleaming. Ugh. Seabrook also claimed to have come across the body of a dead black Bokor, or sorcerer from whom he looted the raising the dead spell. Seabrook would continue to write obsessively and racistly about Black Haitians as well as Black people living on the continent of Africa. He insisted that Africans are taught to eat, quote, a goat without horns, raw or partly cooked. That is, a human child. He even claimed to have been given access to a secret devil-worshipping cannibal assembly and after some negotiation allowed to sample the cuisine. Africans, he said, taste like veal. We can still see Griffith's and Seabrook's nasty little fingerprints in so many representations of Black people. Violence, deviance, voodoo. These representations have firmly planted themselves in the American consciousness. Today, I will provide an overview of Blacks in the horror genre, though through a different lens, thereby rejecting their hold on the genre and on our stories. I want to leave as much time as possible for conversation with Reggie, so I'm going to tell you now what your takeaways are. First, there are Blacks in horror movies, like Bernard Rose's 1992 Candyman starring Tony Todd, Tate Taylor's 2019 Ma starring Octavia Spencer. These films typically don't come out of the imagination of Black writers, nor do they center Blackness, the history, culture, and lived experiences of Blacks. In some instances, Black characters are simply parachuted into these stories, in service to whiteness and with harmful effect. Think Alfre Woodard's turn in Annabelle, where she shows up to advance the trope of the sacrificial Negro. Second takeaway, there are Black horror movies. Jordan Peele's film Get Out recently put Black horror at the center of the critical and scholarly conversation. Black horror, now described under my brand eponym horror noir, is what some might call a race film. Black horror calls attention to Blackness, life, culture, socio-political issues, as well as history and ideologies, belief systems, language, humor, aesthetic, style, and music. Per film historian Thomas Cripps, a Black film has Black creators and performers that speak to Black audiences and at times incidentally to white audiences. Think Candyman 2021, Eve's Bayou, Tales from the Hood, Death by Temptation, Blacula, His House. I find Black horror films most interesting and often a necessary counter to the Griffith Seabrook legacy. Third takeaway, we are not in a Black horror renaissance. Though I've been asked for a quote on this topic no less than 43 times, I have 2 pieces even about us living in the golden age of Black horror. The truth is, I don't actually believe this is our Black horror renaissance. Yes, Jordan Peele earned that Academy Award in 2018 for Best Original Screenplay for Get Out. But if my 2011 book, Horror Noir, taught us anything at all, it's that Black horror movies have been around among Black audiences for more than a century. The films have been presented unceasingly. Indeed, one early filmmaker was Eloise Gist, who you see here on the screen, a woman who was directing haunting morality tales in the 1930s. Today, largely because Black horror has now crossed over, the rest of the world is finally catching up on the richness of Black horror history. Black history is Black horror. That's how award-winning writer Tananarive Due so eloquently put it in our documentary film, Horror Noir. Black history is Black horror. Tananarive, who's on my screen in the upper left-hand corner, was recalling the life of her mother, civil rights activist Patricia Due. In 1960, Patricia spent nearly 50 days in a Tallahassee, Florida jail for sitting at a whites-only Woolworth's lunch counter. If that weren't bad enough, Patricia's eyes were permanently damaged by tear gas fired at her by police. Tananarive is also speaking to the great many extralegal murders of Black people by police and the U.S.'s century-long love affair with lynching Black people. Black history is Black horror. Still, there's another way to hear Tananarive's words. She didn't say Black history is Blacks in horror. She said Black history is Black horror. Perhaps it's easier to show you what I mean. Nia De Costa. Nia De Costa is the director of the new Candyman film, whose screenplay was written by Jordan Peele. De Costa is motivated by the intersection of Black history, lived Black horror, and the Black horror film. As you watch the short teaser for the film, and again, I promise you completely not scary and not bloody, but as you watch this short teaser for the film, look for a nod to George Stinney, a child executed by the state of South Carolina in 1944 under known false claims of murdering 2 white girls. Look for a reminder of the 1998 lynching of James Byrd Jr., who was dragged to his death chained to the back of a pickup truck, driven by white supremacists in Jasper, Texas. Look for how true it is that Black history is Black horror. this talk about Nia De Costa, it reminds me of an important exception to the notion that we're not experiencing a Black horror renaissance, and that's women. Women are experiencing a horror resurgence. Certainly, women have been making their mark in horror for decades. For example, one of my favorite films is the 1934 film Chloe, Love is Calling You. For its time, Chloe is unintentionally rebellious. It dishes out an unexpected indictment on plantation servitude, on lynching and racism, and even the one-drop rule. Chloe, Love is Calling You stars the gifted Georgette Harvey as Mandy, who sets out to avenge the lynching of her husband, Sam. Mindy is revolutionary. She terrorizes the white Louisiana turpentine plantation owning family responsible for her husband's murder, and she does so with voodoo. She abducts their infant daughter, raising her as Black. Then, later, when the family sees the young woman, without knowing her true identity, they racistly remark, "Ugh, she's so dark." Mandy disrupts gender role performances by dressing and performing as the male Loa Baron Samedi, keeper of the crossroads. And significantly, for all of this mayhem, Mandy does not die at the end of this horror film. Women are taking still greater control of the horror genre. I want to believe that in writing and directing Eve's Bayou, also set in Louisiana, Casey Lemons, in my upper left-hand corner with the sort of blonde locks, Casey Lemons was boldly doing two things. First, she was rejecting the stereotypical view of voodoo as seen in movies like Chloe. And second, she was talking back to her role as Bernadette in the original Candyman. That's her as Bernadette at the bottom of the screen. If you recall, Bernadette was oddly slaughtered by the Candyman, or by Candyman in the Bernard Rose film. She didn't summon him. She didn't say Candyman 5 times. She didn't challenge his precious myth. She's actually respectful of his territory and of his narrative. And yet, she's the one that dies a ghastly death. In the meantime, Candyman in King Kong style, in Creature from the Black Lagoon style, in The Birth of a Nation style, judiciously protects and pines over, obsessively over, his white paramour, Helen. Helen, a sort of ancestor to those that lynched Candyman in the first place. She is spared Bernadette's fate. Lemons showed the industry how one can do better. Her Eve's Bayou is a gorgeous, deeply layered story of family, generational privilege, love's lost, murder, and magic. Lemons' Eve's Bayou snatches Black culture and ritual back from Seabrook. De Costa does the same with Candyman 2021 by centering monstrous systems of oppression, not by crafting the other or butchering Black people. On screen, Black final girls are ruling the day. Final girls are smart, resourceful, fighter survivors. Final girls intersect with my conceptualization, the enduring Black woman. Enduring Black women are sheroes who know that the greater battle is with monsters who embody white supremacy, police brutality, and the infiltration of drugs and guns into their community and the like. So unlike Ripley in Alien, or Laurie Strode in Halloween, or Sally in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, enduring women do not get to sigh in relief at the movie's end, knowing that the monster is dead, franchises notwithstanding. The real monster for the enduring Black woman are barriers to equality and power and justice. These things linger, which means that she must fight another day. Today, after a terrible detour beginning in the 1980s, which resurrected stupid Seabrook-esque voodoo stereotypes and violence, yes, I See You, Serpent in the Rainbow, and Skeleton Key movies, Black women are front and center in the genre. This year's Master, Black Hair, The Girl with All of the Gifts, and my personal favorite, Sweetheart, with the best monster reveal ever. All of these films show Black women as fierce, funny, flawed, and certainly able to carry the genre. Now, there are two questions I get asked the most as it pertains to Black horror. First, do Black people really always die first? That one's easy. The answer's no. Black people can't always die first because they serve the purpose of doing battle with the monster once it finally appears. Then they have to lose. That's when they die. So this sets the scene for a showdown between the monster and then the now established super white protagonist, who then must emerge as hero. The second question I get is, can horror really teach us about social justice? I get it. We live in a world where there exists a human centipede 1, 2, and 3. When the genre rises above such gross outs, we get all giddy and create ruminative subgenres. Critic Ann Bilson puts it this way: whenever a horror movie makes a splash, there is inevitably an article calling it smart or elevated or even art house horror. They hate horror so much they have to frame its hits as something else. I have long proclaimed that Black horror is our social syllabus. Horror is a genre that is unencumbered. It's daring, free. The status makes horror more powerful and instructive, not less. Ibram Kendi, in his 2016 book, Stamped from the Beginning, notes that the anti-racist progress of the 1960s was undermined by what he says is the sensationalized crises of Black single-parent households, welfare queens, affirmative action, and violent rebels and criminals, end quote. All of this found its way into Blacks in horror with urban-centered stories such as Tenement of the 1980s, Candyman of the 90s, and Leprechaun in the Hood of the 2000s. But my research tells me that Black horror films fought back against these narratives. For example, in 91 Short Minutes, Soul Vengeance, also known as Welcome Home, Brother Charles, succinctly and pointedly co-signed on what political activist and scholar Angela Davis has been telling us all along. The carceral state, racist policies, police brutality, and unemployment turned recidivism are killing us. Jama Fanaka's Soul Vengeance, set in LA, talked back to Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and the NAACP to show how racial uplift and respectability politics failed as a pathway to anti-racism. And in true horror fashion, Soul Vengeance challenged whether civil disobedience is more effective at producing liberation than uncivil disobedience. This is something that Angela Davis, with her Armed Rebellion, similarly challenged us to think about. So let's talk about Get Out. Get Out presents an important disruption of the persistent narrative that safe and stable Black urbanity is vanishing, and that white suburbia is the protective space. Political commentator Rich Benjamin calls this conceptualization of white suburbia white-topias. They are those defiant little communities that remain willfully less multicultural. This in spite of the fact that the United States is transforming into an increasingly racially and ethnically diverse nation. I, along with my colleague Novotny Lawrence, have written about Get Out and the Black urban. We assert the film recuperates the notion of the urban as home, using Chris's feelings about his deceased mother and the bond that he shares with his Black friends, his surrogate family. These relationships are emblematic of the love, concern, and loyalty that exists in Black Brooklyn and Black urban spaces more broadly. Get Out opens with Andre Hayworth, who you see on the screen. Far from Black Brooklyn, he's talking to a friend on his cell phone while walking through an unspecified Whitopia, USA. Andre feels out of place, complaining to his friend on the phone, "They got me out here in this creepy-ass suburb. I stick out like a sore thumb." This introductory scene accomplishes two things. First, it establishes the Black urban as non-threatening. It's not creepy-ass. Second, the urban becomes home to the kindred, among whom one does not stick out like a sore thumb. Andre is indeed in danger in what is stereotypically understood as a safe space. His dread turns to violence as he's grabbed from behind, rendered unconscious by a masked driver, thrown into the trunk of a car and driven away. This disturbing scene instantly constructs the well-manicured, sterile Whitopia as monstrous. There's more. In a twist that reverses long-standing myths about the danger that Black men pose to white women, Jordan Peele positions the Whitopia matriarch Missy as the quintessential threat to Black masculinity. A skilled psychiatrist, she uses hypnosis to enter Chris's mind without his permission. Missy then forces Chris to relive the night that his mother died, a scene that further illustrates the mother-son connection and how he came to view their home in the Black urban as sanctuary. Chris reveals at the onset of his hypnosis that he was at home watching TV when his mother, coming from work, was killed in a hit and run. She was coming home, he explains with grief. He finally realizes something is wrong when he agonizes. She wasn't home. It's Chris's innocence, denial, and comfort inside his home that leads him to continue watching television instead of stepping outside of his sanctuary to search for his mother and confront the shattering facts of her death. In both of these moments, Chris's actions, or the lack thereof, reinforce the importance of the Black home. In such spaces, Black families are generally safe, shielded from the dangers associated with simply existing while Black. The notion of the safety of Black families and Black spaces is illustrated through Chris's relationship with his mother. His memorialization of her cuts against predominant cinematic constructions of Black women in urban spaces. Get Out rejects the stereotype of the toxic Black urban mothers such as Mary and Precious, Wanda in Holiday Heart, Miss Baker in Boys in the Hood. Instead, Get Out shows the strength of Chris's relationship with his mother, as well as the emotional scarring left by her death. Chris's love for his mother and the comfort of the space in which he grew up makes more significant Rose's betrayal in dangling before him the false promise of fleeing the Whitopia for his home. After the odd behavior of the party guests, Chris demands to leave. Rose acquiesces, saying, "Let's go home. This sucks. I'll make something up." However, Rose is working to get Chris to a place where his home will be forever inaccessible, to something more insidious than a Whitopia. It is the sunken place, or blackness forever recessed into, absorbed by, and placed into the service of whiteness. The point is, Black horror affords us lessons in justice and belonging, and fetishization and cultural appropriation in truly unexpected ways. Black horror is often the story of extreme change. It's Afrofuturism. It shows us alternate reality and charged solutions. It is a pedagogical goldmine. To create your own social justice reading list, you might find the Horror Noir syllabus, or the Afrofuturism syllabus, or the anti-racist graphic novel reading list useful. We can all benefit from diverse tools in our teaching, learning, and activism tool belts to help us better understand why the real monsters are often us. So, I've called us monsters. I've reviewed Black horror versus Blacks in horror. I've talked about the Renaissance women are seeing. And I have reminded you of the value of Black home. There's but one thing left to do. Sending back a dead spirit after you have called it. Pick up a handful of dirt, which you will throw to the four corners of the earth, saying, "Go back from where you came, from dirt you were created, to dirt you may return." Amen. Thank you for listening. I think you're muted.
Sorry, technical difficulties. It's because I was sitting here like Saturday morning cartoon style, just enamored, hanging on every word. So, wow, amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope it was okay.
Okay, very beyond okay. Amazing presentation. So thank you so much. I've got a few questions here, and I think even in the presentation, a few that just kind of came to light. Thank you. I'm seeing comments coming in as well.
Yes, thank you, Diane. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, so, and just to let anyone know, anyone who does have any comments on the Facebook feed or here, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But I feel especially privileged right now because I get to ask you questions I have. So I do want to start with I guess, kind of a foundational one here for anyone who has not read the book or watched the documentary yet. Could you tell us how you came to be a fan of this genre? And maybe also what point in your life did you say, this could be something academic?
Yeah.
Engaged in that.
I love this. Okay, so there's two parts to this question. The first is, how did I become a fan of horror? So I know I'm talking mostly to an audience in Jersey, but if anybody out there is from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where I was born and raised, then you know why I am writing about horror. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is the birth of the zombie movie, the modern zombie movie that doesn't implicate blackness. Pittsburgh is where George Romero, in and around Pittsburgh, filmed Night of the Living Dead. And Night of the Living Dead is perhaps had the most powerful impact on me because of what happens at the end of the film. So that the film is now 54, 55 years old. So I think it's okay to offer a spoiler, Reggie, which is Romero claims at least that he engaged in colorblind casting and casting Dwayne Jones as the starring character Ben. Ben survives a night of, sort of the zombie apocalypse, only to emerge in the light of day to be gunned down by a white police militia that looks so much like we saw in 1960s civil rights films, what we see today with the police murders that we're seeing almost every day on the nightly news. So you can't grow up in and around Pittsburgh and not be a horror fan. Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. So that's sort of my birthright. The other question was, how did I turn this into scholarship? So Reggie, here's the secret. I've been writing for perhaps a decade a multi-volume book on the history of the NAACP and their involvement in media activism and critiques on respectability politics. The book is fire, Reggie. It's fire, right? It's been a long haul. When I would take a break from writing that book, which hasn't come out yet, I would write about horror, which was fun. And then I would say, who wants to hear me talk about the NAACP? And people would go, but that horror stuff, can you come talk about that? And it blew up. And so that's how we're here together today, because we have figured out that there are great social justice lessons in horror, specifically Black horror.
That's great. I love that. Just a little bit. So I had the same sort of transformative moment with Dwayne Jones, the brother in Night of the Living Dead, and I remember.
And also in Ganja and Hess.
Oh yeah, another amazing. I believe in Spike remade that, right? Spike.
Yes.
The
Sweet Blood of Jesus.
Sweet Blood of Jesus, which I still have not seen, but need to create my connect to be done, fill off my Spike Lee required viewing. But yeah, that was, even as a kid, before I completely understood the significance of that moment, I felt it. There was no way to voice it, put it together, but I knew, okay, because I'm cheering I'm cheering him on to the movie, and then at the end, and of course, that connection growing up and seeing and going back to Romero and that film. And also, that as a scholar myself, I've always been a film fan, a big music fan. Public Enemy's "It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back" changed my life, and I think through media, I do find myself engaging in history, so as sort of like a conduit and gateway. And that's one of the things I love about this book is, it's painting that broader picture. It helps to paint that broader picture, but also the complications in there. And I think I have one more question lined up before I get to that, but I wanted to jump back into Blacula, because the piece you write on that in particular engages so much, the progress and sort of the regression within that. But I do want to kind of just jump forward to some of the recent films, because there's been a little, bit of controversy. We talked about, films like Antebellum and the TV series Them in particular, both have Black creators at the helm, but they've also faced a bit of backlash from Black viewers, particularly in the case of the latter. I believe I have a quote from Jessica Kearney of the Michigan Daily, who wrote there's a major difference between teaching and sharing stories of the Black experience in a historical format and sharing stories of the Black experience in a gratuitously violent manner. Do you feel, I guess, one, this is a valid criticism, and also just how does this sort of complicate the Black horror narrative?
So, oops, there was a pop-up there. Let me get this out the way. So the first is, I will answer this question. I want to go back to your love of music. I don't want to let that fly by too quickly.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, I think, also about the soundtrack of horror. So, for example, Get Out, but particularly in that horror of the 70s and 90s, these are the horror films that either create liberation music or use them as their soundtrack. And so we don't want to rush past the notion of the ways in which sound, particularly music, is used in these films. And so you'll hear or see when Black people are free in some of these horror films, they are invoking, kind of like Blackness and Black love, often set to a hip hop beat. And then when there is threat, it sometimes even is sonically signaled through a shift in genre, right? Sometimes outside of Black music, or something that's more haunting where music is substituted with like spooky sounds. So I don't want to rush by that too quickly, but we know in the 90s, there was so much love for horror among rappers. And so everybody from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to the Ghetto Boys was in on, their send up on horror. And I'm trying to think of his name from the Broadway play Hamilton, who played Thomas Jefferson, who was also on Blackish. He was Rainbow's brother on Blackish. His name just went out of my head. David.
David Diggs.
Sorry, David Diggs. Yeah.
David Diggs. And Dale, you can bring your screen back up if you'd like. I'd love to see your face if it's okay. There you are. Yes, we're family.
Reggie prepared for this so much. I'm going to let him do all of it. He had prepared for this and was so excited about this. So I will defer. Thank you for the invitation, though. Thank you.
Special guest appearance.
So David even does, and you can find it on YouTube. So he's got musical chops, and he does quite a few horror send-ups as well, right? So the horror genre expands beyond what's on the big or small screen to, sort of horror music that Black folks produce. So I appreciate that, Reggie. Check that out. I guess we'll circle back to Blacula, because really what we're doing in some ways is contrasting a Blacula, which had a kind of a social justice message about what does it mean for, sort of anti-Blackness, Black trauma, to kind of take a delayed trip through the Middle Passage and land in LA centuries later, which is what happens with Blacula. And that's a different kind of movie than an Antebellum or Them, which takes up the same narratives. So they're on the same trajectory. The question is what the author was talking about in the Michigan Daily is this kind of trauma porn? So is it valid? It absolutely, the arguments are valid. And at the same time, I don't think they should be lobbed at the horror genre. And here's why. If you read again the quote, which is, can you read it was sort of the last line of the quote.
Let's see. Oops. Let's see. I'll flip through it though. There's a major difference between teaching and sharing stories of the Black experience in a historical manner and sharing stories of the Black experience in a gratuitously violent manner.
Gratuitously violent is the definition of horror. I mean, that is, the genre is delivering exactly what it promises. Horror is often, it's not 100%. Sometimes it's psychological thrillers, sometimes it's, right? But that is literally the definition. So what Antebellum, what Them did, let's not conflate whether they're quality with the ways in which even if you have to watch through your fingers like this, that there is a historical lesson and message. And it doesn't mean that all Black horror films have to be pedagogical and about social justice either.
Mm.
But understand that people who watched Antebellum and them, whether they liked it or not, reflected, as did the Michigan Daily author, about anti-Blackness in this country. That's the power of Black horror. That's what makes this so important and worth conversation.
Mm. That's great. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that answer. And I guess just to go back to Blacula, and I do want to say, actually, another question just off the bat, because you, in writing of Blacula, sort of made me think of the Bell Hooks book, Reel to Reel. And I do want to ask maybe some other like Black texts that deal with film that you may have engaged with. But in Reel to Reel, I remember I love Crooklyn, speaking of movie soundtracks.
You're a Spike Lee fan.
I am. I know Spike is the other special guest in spirit here. But I just remember watching that film and, to me, nothing.
Semi-autobiographical Spike Lee's film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think she engages in her book sort of, there's this picture of the Black family, but then also within the film, the way I believe it's Alfre Woodard.
Yeah.
That.
Delroy Lindo, Alfre Woodard. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, sort of what she sort of pictured as regressive elements within what could be considered a progressive film. And I think you do speak to that some in I believe it was Blacula. I think because we've talked about, I know you talk about several isms in the book, including sexism and various things. So I think if I'm not mistaken, Blacula has that progressive, it's progressive, but also has a few elements that are still a bit, we need work here.
So, it's the 70s. And what I'm trying to do in the book is defend Blacula. What William Crane, what William Marshall does with Blacula is truly extraordinary. And there are these seminal foundational directors. Eloise Gist, who I talked about, I showed, Spencer Williams of Amos and Andy fame, whose legacy was completely sort of destroyed by Amos and Andy and the protests around that. This brother makes some amazing spooky films that are morality tales. The Blood of Jesus is one of them, not to be confused with Spike's Sweet Blood of Jesus, but Spencer Williams is an amazing director. And so the William Cranes of the world, we're standing on their shoulders. And in the Horror Noir documentary, what Xavier Bergen, the director, does is captures a scene from Scream, Blacula Scream, where, oh shoot, I can't remember the character's name, but he's certainly vampiric. And he's dressed up, he's fly, and he cannot see himself in the mirror. And he says, what is this jive? A man has got to see his face. And that was a brilliant capture. It was absolutely brilliant, because what Blacula does is that it recuperates the absence, the invisibility of Black folks, not just in horror, but in Black film. So I'm a big fan. I love William Crane. He's always sitting on my shoulder. And so I think that if there's anything that's a little bit retro in those 70s era films, it really has to do with, sort of the lower budgets and lower budgets and resources that they had to work with to create, in fact, some things that were really particularly marvelous. Not all of it was great. Some of it's derivative. The Thing with Two Heads, Blackenstein, some of that is like, but understand that to still engage in movie making under studios like AIP, which weren't investing in Black filmmaking, is just incredible.
And actually, this kind of just came to me as we were talking, as I'm thinking about those films of the 70s. know at some point, of course, those films, AIP and other studios started funding, and there's that, we often talk about like Bessie Smith and Crazy Blues and how that sort of blew up into this industry because they said, oh, well, they'll buy records too. And I wonder if there's, any kind of connection to films like Sweetback, sort of independent Black cinema that was a major blockbuster for Melvin Van Peebles. And, I don't know if you engaged that as well? Like, did that have anything that Black horror sort of fall under that banner of, okay, well, we can make money doing this?
Well, certainly so there's two ways to answer this question. The first is that absolutely AIP as a studio is one that would look out across the landscape, see what, other studios were doing, like, like the Universal monsters, the classic monsters, Dracula, the Mummy, that kind of thing, or the Hammer films, and then rip them off, right? Do a low budget version of them. And certainly they are trying to do a lot of profit seeking, very low investment, but hoping to get some return by then doing something that is derivative. So that's how you end up with Blackula, Blackenstein, that kind of thing, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Black, all of those. But that doesn't mean that we were fully confined to those constraints that AIP set out, as an example. And I pick on AIP because a lot of these movies of the time came out then. But what we did within those confines, I think, is laudable and notable. So that's the first thing. But the other is that where are we with independent film? Not just then, but today. And Sweetback evidences what Black film can be in the hands of Black creatives, right? It's a trajectory of cultural production that we talk about for decades and decades after their offering. The most important thing I will say now is that there's such great possibility through technology. We don't have to be, sort of at the beck and call entirely of distributors and low budget, resource distribution. We can pick up our iPhones and we can put something up on YouTube or other, video platforms and say, forget that. And what's most important is then we see film festivals who are turning, looking for this fodder and recognizing it. So increasingly, technology is allowing us to stretch in ways that we always knew that we could.
Great. Thank you. So I do want to ask, actually, I had a question. So Dale is still here, but one of a really good question here. I just wanted to make sure I hit. Are there any fabulous women horror noir writers, Black horror writers, or whose work you'd like to see become a feature film? Just to translate over from book to film.
Tananarive Due is as fabulous as one can get. Tananarive is, I don't know, how many threats is she? She's writer. She novelist, across genres, sci-fi, horror, Afrofuturism. She's doing screenplays. She's got one of the more popular podcasts right now, and she's knocking it out of the park with her partner, Stephen Barnes, and they're getting just incredible, kind of Hollywood guests on there. Her work it's so amazing, and it is finally, mainstream media is discovering what we already knew. This sister can write a story, and it's fierce, and it's not always, kind of about, the criticism around antebellum or them. It's not always about social justice. Sometimes these stories are just Black stories. They don't always have to be super instructive and pedagogical. Sometimes it is just that the thing that is political is the mundane, right? Because we still don't see Black people just being, and that it doesn't have to have these huge racial implications. But in the end, the huge racial implication for some of Tananarive's stories is that there isn't one, that they just are existing. And so I would say that is the Shiro. That's the North Star for me right now.
It's great. Yeah, she's amazing. And yeah, you did actually also kind of touch on something else I wanted to get to, and that is that, the notion that Black horror films have to be sort of these heavy engagements. And I think you do talk about sort of the importance of a film like, I believe, was it Jordan Peele's Us, which, is not, like Get Out is sort of the race film, but that goes in its own, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, everything doesn't have to be woke horror.
Mhm.
Like we don't always. And us is that we'll see what Nope does. Um, but yeah, sometimes it's just entertaining, and it isn't simply just horror is entertaining, and sometimes they have stories, but like any other genre, and sometimes they're funny. Black horror is also super funny. Um, so I think there's a huge range, and that's as it should be.
That's definitely. I should ask, this is like the the sort of popcorn question. Do you have I know you watch a lot, but is there a above and beyond favorite horror movie that you have, or scariest that you care to mention?
So horror. Okay. So outside of the horror genre, because people sometimes ask this, um, A Soldier's Story is hands down one of my favorites. Every time it pops up, I'm watching it. The other is A Devil in a Blue Dress. I'm always watching that.
Mm.
So I just have to get those out there. In the horror genre, not black horror, but blacks in horror. But there's a lot of elements to talk about around blackness in this movie. The Thing. Every time John Carpenter's The Thing comes on, I'm watching that. Uh, and folks are always trying to deny whether the brother lived or whether he was the it. Look, come on, give me a break. And then I just, so I love The Thing. You have to give props at least as far as that powerful ending around Night of the Living Dead. But I tell you what, Reggie, I just watched Master
Mhm.
recently, and that, to quote Adrian Davis at Wash U, that film's a documentary for those of us in higher ed. We were talking on Facebook, and I said, Good Lord, they simply came in and set up cameras and filmed my day to day existence as a scholar, administrator, particularly at a PWI, a predominantly white institution. Master didn't feel like entertainment or any distance at all um, between real life and fiction. That is the reality that we live on these campuses.
Yeah, this is I said it's on my go to watch list. So I'm gonna definitely try to squeeze some time out in the semester. And me, just big up to Adolph Caesar of Soldier Story, who I learned not too long ago is the voice of, I believe, the old blaxploitation cinema trailers.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I looked that up.
I didn't know that.
I did my best to vet that information. I tried as a historian to be responsible, but yeah, if you get a chance tonight, I think YouTube Adolf Caesar trailers, and
Okay.
and I can hear his voice when I read that.
Once you,
It is distinctive, but yes, that's one of my favorites. Um, and The Thing is something I just crossed off my John Carpenter list in recent years, and I've probably watched it. I'm making up for years of not seeing that amazing film, Keith David, and I believe Keith is in.
he is.
Yeah, the
He
amazing
is.
Keith David.
And then I think Keith is in Tales from the Hood 3.
Hmm.
Yeah, but Keith is, I mean, it just the number of films that he has under his belt, but also the number of horror films that he's shown up in. Keith David, and I hope I'm saying his name correctly, but Ken Foree is another, Miguel Nunez. Like, there are these folks of, interestingly enough, Ice-T, that are just in horror film after horror film. And, so it doesn't always have to, we're not giving enough attention to some of these people who just keep the genre moving forward.
Absolutely. And speaking of the documentary, since we went to Keith David, I do want to ask how that came about. An ideal, someone reached out to you.
This was truly a sister project. So understand, I mean, these things are sort of complicated tales, but understand what's happening. Tananarive Due has her course at UCLA called The Sunken Place, and she's using the horror noir text as, to inform some of her syllabus. Then you have Ashley Blackwell, who's there in Philly at St. Joseph's. And she has Graveyard Shift Sisters, the website, which, is tracking every Black woman in the horror genre for all time in the US. Ashley's an amazing scholar as well. And so you have us as these sort of three women using also Studio 3 Productions, which this project was coordinated by a woman, coming together. But it's Ashley who says, I've read this and I see a script here. And she's the one that really starts to get the ball rolling, and she's in horror noir. And I actually can't imagine life now without Ashley and Tananarive. I mean, we're the three that link arms and, slow-mo walk with explosions behind us because, these are fierce sisters. And what's happened with horror noir since has just been amazing. And I bow down to Ashley for that.
Wow. Yeah. And I can testify, just when I had announced this as an upcoming program, several people said, oh, wow. People are still picking up on it. And, I've heard only amazing things from people who had gotten a chance to see it before I did. And like I said, I love that I had finished the book first and had that, my first thought was, I'd love to know what she said about the last 10 years. And
you know what? I had no idea that this was going to happen with this book. So I write the book. That was like so long ago. And then it blows up and I'm like, oh my gosh. So the update is coming out. Like I said, I take us all the way up through master. So, Get Out is there. And so it's fresh. It's as quickly as we can get it out. It's coming out. So we've got the last couple of decades. I've got the last couple of decades covered. And then someone else who appears in the documentary, Mark Harris. I want to give him a shout out. He has a really important website. It's called blackhorrormovies.com. And if you want a full history of every horror movie that has ever come out, a Black horror movie in the history of ever, you go to Mark's site. And I'm so honored to have been able to co-author with Mark around Black horror. And I get a lot of fame and credit, but Mark is kind of the original Black horror scholar. And so I'm pretty blessed to have been able to write with him as well. We have a book coming out called The Black Guy Dies First. And it's funny. This one is a funny, accessible book that I think people will have, sort of carrying around in their back pockets, in the way that some people would carry around Iceberg Slim books. This is going to be a hilarious entry to the conversation about Black horror.
Oh, that's great. Is there a timeline for the release of that one, or is that still in progress as far as?
The book is complete. It's done. It's in with the publisher, and I'm hearing that there have been physical printing delays around getting paper, like big paper rolls, and being able to print books. Mm-hmm. So we're waiting, but the book is in, and we're hoping if not sometime this year, early next year.
Okay, yeah, absolutely looking forward. And course, the Newark Public Library, we'll make sure that we get our copy and, get your own personal copy. Support, please, what the sister is doing, because, it's amazing work, especially for us film fans. And, just for me, Black culture, I think I was telling you back in school studying, and that particularly Black cultural productions and, books like this is what inspires and charges me to go forward. So I appreciate it. I guess I don't know if we touched on this too much. I think we did mention that, the book sort of ends in 2011. And there's something in the distance, Netflix, this thing coming up. And I don't know if you care to kind of speak to just within these past, 10 to 12 years, how much progress, for better or worse, that you've seen between that time, the end of the book, to where we're at now with mass.
There's no question. What's most important about what happens, right? Understand how quickly technology has changed in the last, what is that, 2011 that it ends, right? In the last couple of decades. So, it's really, or last decade or so, it's just been extraordinary where that book the focus is on major studio films. And the update to the book, it just isn't. So now but importantly, we're also talking about U.S. audiences' access to more international Black audience offerings that are coming through the streaming platforms. And so we're able to expand. So I think that's been fascinating. But also what's been really interesting is just all of the Black horror shorts that are out there that are on video or platforms like a YouTube that we have access to. Almost daily, somebody is sending me a link saying, check this out on this, this space. And there's some incredible work that is going on out there by aspiring filmmakers that just rings around what we saw coming out of the major studios the decades earlier. I also think that what's happening, this sort of seriality that's happening on the small screen where there's these short series for 4, 5, 6 episodes, and then that's it. I think that's been really fascinating. The introduction of Shudder, which is completely dedicated to horror, has been an important entry, and I think people are working hard to duplicate that. The appetite for Shudder's offerings have been notable. Horror Noir, I will claim this, sort of made Shudder. It was the program on the network. It was kind of the way that, Black sitcoms made UPN and WB and CW, right? And then, well, you know what happened with those. Then they canceled us on all those networks and then went to like 90210. But it's the same thing. Black programming will make a network. And so now what you see is a lot of folks trying to duplicate what Horror Noir started. And so you're seeing a lot of documentaries that look at a lot of other identity positions. And then finally, I think where we're still lagging behind is, documentaries that Shudder's putting out that looks, for example, at like sexualities, diverse sexualities. We're still not catching up in the horror genre. I think in some instances, horror still struggles with the ways in which it depicts sexuality. And so, gender fluidity, that kind of thing, that still is something we need to work on.
Right. And yeah, absolutely. And I just want to kind of backtrack a little bit just for anyone who you mentioned the Horror Noir program. So we do want to kind of pick that up for anybody to seek that out. And that's the Anthology, right? With we were talking about that a little bit with Tanana Reeve.
So now there's so much under the horror. So there's a Horror Noir book, first edition, which is mine. Horror Noir second edition, right, which takes the book from 2011 to 2022, is coming out this summer. Then there's the horror noir documentary, which we've been talking about, which is on Shudder, that came out in 2019. Then there's the horror noir anthology, which are a series of Black horror shorts. And that first season, I think there were 6 episodes. That's out, and then there's another season coming out. So season 2 on that. So there's a lot to look for under that horror noir brand. And it's really now you got to kind of do an extra step to make sure you're getting the product that you're looking for under this name. So it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to, and just to anybody has any questions, I know we have a couple comments here. Thank you for your comments. I'm looking forward to the book. Thanks so much for writing and sharing all your research. So yeah, and a couple shout out to Ken Foree, Brother Carlos. So yeah, absolutely. We've got, a few minutes here.
Also, yeah, if I could just jump in, on Facebook, we had quite a few people who stayed with us for the entire time. We thank them. A lot of good comments from Alvita, Sophia, Anaya, Alegria, and also Brother Carlos, Brother Carlos Arturo. He agreed with you on the 2 films. You mentioned The Thing and something else. I do have one question, if I could just with a question. This is about another one of our actors who left us way too soon, baby girl Aaliyah. Portrayed Queen Akasha in Queen of the Damned.
Yes.
And what sounds like you saw it, and what were your thoughts of her portraying that?
Oh, so I think this is really, I think that is certainly a Blacks in horror film. There's no question that she snatches that film, right? And it's the story itself, it's a little bit of a muddy Dracula film. Like he's like Lestat's now like resurrected, and he's like got a rock band, and there's this, it's all over the place. And so when the narrative settles, it's around her.
Yeah.
I think the most important takeaway is the gone too soon. And that is you begin to see where she's going to, she's on this trajectory where you just see that she's going to move into this beautiful space of acting.
Yeah.
And that's taken away, right? So, it's like it's one of the earliest, like, okay, she can do this. And she can do it beautifully, and she can carry a film, and she looks gorgeous, right? So the cinematography around her serves her well. But it was a movie where, she's got this white guy as a co-star, but what could have happened if it was her own vehicle, right? That's what we'll never know.
Yeah, I thought it was important, and I don't know if the author Anne Rice selected her, but that she was chosen for that in what they knew would be a big film, and how they projected her to be all that we wanted her to be. So, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Dale, you watched a few horror films.
There's something I did want to that just came to mind. I'm curious, have you engaged sort of this genre in other spaces? I'm particularly thinking of the African film industry. Have you done or have any plans to do any research as far as the
yes. This is so funny you asked. So first, what's not in horror noir first or second edition is sort of the sort of global attention to Blackness. And the book was just going to be too long. I had this whole history of Nollywood and was drawing parallels between U.S. Black horror that takes up morality and religious tales and what you see in the so-called Nollywood films. And if you know Nollywood films, those films can be 3, 4, 5 hours. They will have an entire church service in the middle of the film.
Oh, wow.
And so in some ways, I'm glad that didn't happen, because right now, my colleague, Novotny Lawrence, and I were frequent writing partners. We are editing a book with Oxford University Press about global Blackness and horror. And so contributors are writing essays if people are interested out there. about the ways in which Blackness is conceptualized around the globe in horror films. We want representation of every continent. And so we've got some great stuff coming out of writers who are writing about Brazil, Australia, specifically the Aboriginal people. Of course, the continent of Africa is represented, but then we also have someone who's proposed something interesting around the absence of blackness in right where the thing was set in Antarctica. So there's a lot happening. That also is scheduled for publication late this year or early next year. So if there's folks out there listening who have an idea, please hit me up. We are still accepting chapters.
All right, listen. let me get on my research grind.
There
And
you go.
amazing. That sounds amazing. Yeah, so as we are winding down, wrapping up, unless y'all want to go for another 2 hours or so. Really, we could just ban about movies, specific movies. But yeah, this has been amazing. So I think if anyone has any questions, I see a lot of great comments. Thank you, Dr. Coleman, for amazing presentation. Suffer PSD, connection to horrors living in America. I think we're on such a positive note. I'm not even going to bring the D.W. Griffith connection into this, but
Yeah, no, we don't, because you know what? That's some other stuff. That's Blacks in horror. Black folks are doing so much in the horror space. We don't. In fact, that's why I was sort of short. Like we don't really need to check for that anymore. We're
yeah,
we're doing amazing things that they no longer need to hover over and overshadow us.
exactly. And I think as we jumped into earlier, I think another film I do want to just spotlight. I think y'all talk about it in the documentary is the great John Boyega's Attack the Block, which is another example of
That's yes. That's so Eve's Bayou is a favorite. Attack the Block is a favorite. That's up there as one of my all-time favorites. So I'm going to give those who are still around some homework. If you haven't seen it, watch Attack the Block. The Girl with all the Gifts is interesting as well. Sweetheart is not super scary, it's not super bloody, but the monster reveal, as I said, that's J.D. Dillard's film, and I just think that one was pretty incredible. John Boyega in Attack the Block, and and he does look a little Denzel-ish in that one, and so but he's good. He really leads that film. That's a brother who can act.
Mm-hmm. And that was his huge star turn, I think, prior to him being in the Star Wars reboot, right? If I'm not mistaken, that's probably what led him to it.
And he's supposed to be doing a sequel to Attack the Block. There's talk about that.
All right, see, so we got to look out for that, as well as the update to Horror Noir in the summer. I got to pick up all your upcoming work now. And I don't know, maybe there'll be a Horror Noir documentary follow up down the line.
We're hoping, we're praying for it. Hopefully, come on through stage 3. We're ready. We need to bring it up to date.
Yeah, I feel there's just such a wealth of film and things going on that it's hard to, it's great to have it sort of curated and say this is what's been going on. We miss a lot.
Yeah.
Out there, but
so the other thing we're looking for finally before I wave you off is Nope. Jordan Peele's Nope. Keke Palmer is another. Dale asked about Aaliyah and how she owned the screen. I think Keke Palmer is going to do the same with Nope. I'm a fan, and I think she's going to snatch this film.
Absolutely, yes. Both looking forward to that as well. And amazing. Thank you so much. This has been.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, appreciate you. And
wonderful.
Everything coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And Dale, any final words, anything, or?
No, thank you ever so, Dr. Robin R. Means. She didn't want to say that, but yes, you earned that, and we respect you and we appreciate your work. Much continued success to you. Anyone who wants to review this and go back through, and we will put contact information for Doctor if you want to perhaps add to or collaborate maybe with some of her ongoing fabulous projects. Thank you ever so. Reggie?
All right, yes, thank you again. Thank you. Can't say thank you enough. And thank you for everyone who joined us, commented. So be well, be safe, peace, love, and soul.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
All right.